The red lights flashed across Tay's blue face as he sat alone in his small ship. The quiet beeping of failing systems was the only sound in the empty cockpit. Tay had been exploring the far reaches of space for 3 years now. He loved finding new stars and mapping unknown regions. But today everything had gone wrong. "Warning, engine failure complete, power systems critical," said the flat voice of the ship's computer. Tay's four-fingered hands moved quickly over the control panel. He had tried everything to fix the engines. Nothing worked. His ship floated helplessly in the darkness between stars, far from any known travel routes. "Computer, run full system check again," Tay said, his voice steady despite his rising fear. The computer hummed softly as it worked. Tay stared out at the stars through the main window. They looked cold and distant. Just yesterday he had found a new asteroid field, rich with rare minerals. His people would have been pleased with the discovery. Now they might never know. "System check complete," the computer announced. "Main engines failed beyond repair. Backup engines offline. Power reserves 18% and falling. Life support functioning at minimum capacity. Estimated oxygen depletion in 72 hours. Communication array damaged by radiation. Distress beacon. Operational but signal strength at 40%. Tay blinked his large eyes slowly. The news was exactly as bad as he had expected. His species, the Viridians, were known throughout the galaxy for their logical minds and advanced technology. They rarely made mistakes. The engine failure had been caused by an unexpected radiation surge from a dying star, something no one could have predicted. "Computer, calculate survival probability," Tay said, though he already knew the answer. "Calculating. Survival probability 1.8%. Tay nodded. Viridian teaching was clear on this matter. When survival chances fell below 5%, the most logical action was to accept death and ensure any collected data would survive. Fighting against such poor odds was considered wasteful and illogical. He opened his personal log and began to record. "This is Senior Explorer Tay, final entry. My ship has suffered catastrophic engine failure in Sector 7 Gamma 9. My position is approximately 142 light-years from the nearest Viridian outpost. Survival chances are calculated at 1.8%. He paused, looking at the small picture of his family unit displayed next to the control panel. His bondmate Min and their young offspring would mourn him according to Viridian custom, with quiet dignity and logical acceptance of fate. "I have attached all data collected during this expedition, including the detailed scans of the mineral-rich asteroid field discovered yesterday. This information should prove valuable to our people." The lights dimmed further as the ship automatically reduced power usage. Emergency protocols were in effect now. Tay felt cold as the heating system lowered to preserve energy. "As per protocol, I will remain at my post until the end. I have activated the ship's black box beacon, which should continue broadcasting for 200 years after my death." Tay's hands trembled slightly. Though his species valued logic above all, they still experienced emotions. They simply didn't let feelings guide their decisions. Right now, Tay felt fear, regret, and a deep loneliness that seemed to match the empty void surrounding his disabled ship. He stood up and moved to the small storage compartment, removing his emergency rations. With 72 hours of oxygen, he needed to decide how to spend his final days. Viridian protocol suggested maintaining normal functions until the end, but with no hope of rescue, perhaps another approach made more sense. Returning to his seat, Tay accessed the ship's database. If these were to be his final hours, he would spend them learning about the universe he had dedicated his life to exploring. He pulled up star charts of regions he had never visited, reading about distant worlds he would never see. As the hours passed, Tay wrote messages to his family, catalogued his personal possessions for distribution, and made peace with his fate. His people didn't believe in an afterlife, but they did believe that energy was never truly lost, merely transformed. The second day, the ship's temperature dropped further. Tay wrapped himself in thermal blankets as he continued his work. The oxygen level indicator showed 48 hours remaining. He found himself staring at it more frequently now. "Computer, any response to our distress signal?" Tay asked, though he knew the answer. Negative, no response detected. The distress beacon had been broadcasting for over 24 hours. In this remote region, it was unlikely anyone would detect it. Still, some small illogical part of Tai hoped for rescue, despite the overwhelming evidence that he would die here. As he drifted in and out of sleep, conserving energy, Tai dreamed of his homeworld, its crystal cities and purple skies. He remembered the day he had been selected for the Explorer program, the pride in his family's eyes. The stars continued their silent watch as Tai's ship drifted through the emptiness. One small vessel, one lone being facing the vastness of space. The universe, indifferent to his plight, carried on its ancient cycles of creation and destruction, and still the distress beacon blinked, sending its weak signal into the darkness, calling for help that would almost certainly never come. Tai lay still on the floor of his ship, saving every breath. It had been 3 days since his ship broke down. The air was getting thin. Each breath felt harder than the last. The emergency lights had dimmed to save power, leaving Tai in near darkness. According to his calculations, he had less than 6 hours of oxygen left. He had accepted his fate with the calm logic of his people. His final messages were recorded. His data was preserved. There was nothing to do now but wait for the end. Tai closed his large eyes. His blue skin had turned a pale shade from the cold and lack of oxygen. He thought of his homeworld, with its crystal towers and purple skies. At least his discoveries would make it back to his people someday, when someone found the ship's data recorder. Suddenly, a sharp beeping noise broke the silence. Tai's eyes snapped open. The proximity alert was going off, something his logic said was impossible. There were no planets, ships, or space stations in this empty part of space. With great effort, Tai pulled himself up from the floor. His limbs felt heavy as he dragged himself to the control panel. The screen showed an approaching vessel. Its design was unlike any ship Tai had ever seen. "This must be a malfunction," Tai whispered to himself. His fingers, now stiff from cold, tapped the screen to run a diagnostic. Before the test could complete, the communication system crackled to life. "Unidentified vessel, this is Captain Park of the Earth ship Horizon. We've detected your distress signal. Do you require assistance?" Tai stared at the communication panel. Humans? The primitive species from the outer arm of the galaxy? He had read about them in science journals, but Viridians rarely interacted with humans. They were considered unpredictable and emotional. Interesting to study, but not important partners for advanced species like his own. Yet here they were, somehow detecting his weak distress beacon across vast distances of space. Tai's logical mind struggled to process this unexpected development. With trembling hands, Tai activated the communication system. "This is Surveyor Tai of Viridian Science Fleet," he said, his voice raspy from lack of use. "My vessel is critically damaged, life support failing." There was a brief pause before the human captain responded. "Understood, Surveyor. Be advised, we're detecting radiation from nearby solar activity. Rescue will be challenging, but we're coming for you." Tai checked his sensors. The human was right. A solar flare from a nearby star was sending dangerous radiation through this section of space. It would make any rescue attempt extremely risky. "Captain, radiation levels make rescue attempt inefficient. Risk calculation suggests," Tai began, applying the logical analysis his people valued above all else. "With all due respect to your calculations," Captain Park interrupted, "we don't leave people to die alone in space. Prepare for emergency docking in 30 minutes. Tai was stunned into silence. The human captain had dismissed a perfectly sound risk assessment. No Viridian would ever ignore clear statistical danger. It was illogical, inefficient, against everything his culture taught. The scanner showed the human ship changing course, moving directly toward him despite the increasing radiation. Tai watched in amazement as the vessel grew larger on his screen. It was smaller than Viridian ships, with an odd asymmetrical design that seemed almost haphazard to his eyes. "Human vessel, your approach vector will expose you to dangerous radiation levels," Tai warned, feeling strangely responsible for these beings who were risking themselves for him. "We've reinforced our shields," came the calm reply. "Our engineer says we can handle it for the time needed to get you aboard." Tai's scientific curiosity began to overcome his shock. "Your shields can withstand this radiation." Our studies indicate human technology is not advanced enough for such protection. A laugh came through the communication system. We're full of surprises, Surveyor Tay. Now, can your docking system still function, or do we need to attempt manual? Retrieval. Tay ran a quick diagnostic. Docking systems are operational, but at minimal power. Manual guidance will be necessary for the final approach. Good. We're sending you our docking protocols now. Our pilot Jin is the best in the fleet. She'll get us connected. Data streamed across Tai's screen, showing unfamiliar but surprisingly effective docking procedures. As he studied them, Tai noticed the radiation levels rising. The human ship would be taking significant damage during this rescue. Captain Park, I must inform you that your vessel will sustain approximately 14% system damage during this procedure. The logical course would be to abort. Noted, Surveyor, Park replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. But sometimes logic isn't everything. Humans tend to follow their hearts just as much as their heads. We'll see you in 20 minutes. Hang on a little longer. For the first time in days, Tay felt something unexpected, hope, as he watched the human ship grow larger on his screen, braving the radiation storm to reach him. He realized he was witnessing something his people's logical teachings had never prepared him for. The impossible was happening. Someone was coming to save him. The docking procedure was rough but successful. When the airlock doors opened, Tay stumbled into the human ship, barely conscious from oxygen deprivation. Strong hands caught him before he fell. His eyes struggled to adjust to the bright lights after days in his dimly lit, failing vessel. Get him to medical now, someone shouted. Tay was carried through corridors that seemed chaotic compared to the clean, simple design of Viridian ships. Crew members rushed past, their voices loud and their movements unpredictable. The air smelled of strange foods, machine oil, and the unmistakable scent of many beings living in close quarters. To Tay, who was used to the sterile, odorless environment of Viridian vessels, it was overwhelming. In the medical bay, a human doctor with kind eyes placed an oxygen mask over Tay's face. The rush of clean air made him dizzy. Breathe slowly, the doctor said. Your body needs time to adjust. After several hours of treatment, Tai was deemed stable enough to leave medical. Captain Park assigned him a small cabin and invited him to explore the ship once he felt strong enough. On his second day aboard the Horizon, Tay ventured out of his cabin. The narrow corridors were busy with crew members who smiled or nodded at him as they passed. Such casual acknowledgement was strange to Tay. On Viridian ships, interactions were formal and purposeful, never casual. He made his way to the engine room, curious about the technology that had saved his life. The door slid open to reveal a space that seemed impossibly disorganized to his eyes. Tools hung from makeshift hooks. Panels were open with wires exposed. People called to each other over the hum of machinery. A human woman approached him, wiping her hands on a dirty cloth. You must be our Viridian guest. I'm Sue, Chief Engineer. I am Tay. I wish to examine your propulsion systems, he replied formally. Sue smiled. First time meeting humans in person? Yes. Your species' reputation is interesting. Sue laughed, loudly startling Tay. That's diplomatic. Come on, I'll show you around. As they walked through the engine room, Tay noticed how different it was from the engine rooms on Viridian ships. There, everything was in perfect order, each tool in its designated place, each engineer working quietly at their assigned station. Your work environment seems inefficient, Tay observed. Looks like chaos, works like a charm, Sue replied with a shrug. We adapt to circumstances rather than trying to make circumstances adapt to us. They stopped at a console with a flickering screen. Sue studied it for a moment, then struck it firmly with her palm. The screen immediately stabilized. That should not have worked, Tay said, blinking in surprise. But it did, Sue grinned. Humans call it jury-rigging. We're good at making things work when they shouldn't. Sometimes the elegant solution isn't in the manual. That violates all maintenance protocols, Tay observed. Protocols are great until they aren't, Sue said. Then you improvise. The concept of improvisation was foreign to Tay. Viridians followed established procedures because they were proven effective. Deviation was considered dangerous and illogical. Over the next few days, Tay continued to observe the humans. He sat in the mess hall, watching crew members laugh and argue over meals. He visited the bridge where Captain Park consulted with his officers, but often made decisions based on what he called a gut feeling rather than pure data. During a minor crisis, involving a power fluctuation, Tay was surprised to hear jokes being exchanged, even as the crew worked to solve the problem. When he mentioned that Viridians would approach such a situation with serious focus, the operations officer named Jin smiled. "Humor keeps us calm," she explained. "Calm minds work better." Most puzzling to Tay was the way humans formed connections with each other. They touched casually, a hand on a shoulder, a pat on the back. They remembered personal details about each other's lives and asked about family members. These bonds seemed to have no practical purpose, yet humans clearly valued them greatly. One evening, Captain Park invited Tay to share a meal in his private quarters. As they ate, Tay finally asked the question that had been troubling him. "Why did you risk your ship and crew to save me? I was a stranger with no value to your mission." Captain Park looked surprised. "You needed help, that was enough. But the radiation damage to your vessel was significant. The risk calculation clearly indicated—" "We don't always calculate risks the way your people do," Park interrupted gently. "Some things matter more than statistics." "What things?" Tay asked, genuinely confused. "Life, compassion, our shared humanity, or I guess in your case, our shared sentience." Park refilled Tay's cup with a hot beverage they called tea. "Would your people not have done the same?" Tay considered this. "No. If rescue probability fell below 40%, no ship would be sent. It would be considered illogical to risk many for one." Park nodded slowly. "That's one approach. Ours is different." "But it makes no mathematical sense," Tay insisted. "Not everything." "Worthwhile makes mathematical sense," Park replied with a small smile. "That's something you might learn while you're with us." As Tay returned to his cabin that night, he found himself thinking about the strange contradictions of humans. They were technologically inferior to Viridians in many ways. Their ships were less efficient, their methods often haphazard. Yet they had saved him when his own people would have left him to die. Perhaps, Tay thought as he drifted to sleep, there was something to learn from these emotional, unpredictable beings after all. Tay had been on the human ship for 1 week when the alarms started blaring. He was in the mess hall trying to understand a card game some crew members were playing when red lights began flashing. "All hands to emergency stations," Captain Park's voice came through the speakers. "This is not a drill." The humans moved fast, putting away their cards and running to their posts. Tay followed them to the bridge, wanting to help if possible. When the doors slid open, he saw the crew working quickly at their stations. The main screen showed a huge burst of energy coming from a nearby star. "Massive solar flare incoming," First Officer Jun shouted, his fingers flying over his control panel. "Shields at 30% and failing." Captain Park stood calmly in the center of the bridge. "Time to impact?" 3 minutes, Captain," Jun replied. "Evasive maneuvers, full power to—" "Engines," Park ordered. The ship turned sharply, making Tay grab a railing to stay upright, but he could see from the data on the screens that they wouldn't be fast enough to escape the solar flare. The communication system crackled. "Bridge, this is Sue in engineering. The radiation from the last wave damaged our engine cooling systems. We can't maintain full power." "Understood," Park said. "Do what you can." Tay stepped forward. "Captain, may I see the data on the approaching solar flare?" Park nodded, and Jun moved aside to let Tay check his screen. Tay's 4 fingers moved quickly, scanning the information. His species was good at fast calculations. "The flare will hit us in 2 minutes and 42 seconds, Tay said. "Your current shield strength cannot withstand it." The ship shuddered as the outer edge of the radiation wave reached them. Panels sparked and the lights flickered. "Engine core destabilizing," Sue reported over the comm. "We need to vent plasma or we'll lose containment." "Do it," Park ordered. "Venting plasma will further weaken our shields," Jun warned. Tay looked at the data again. He ran the numbers quickly in his head. There was only one logical conclusion. "Captain, I have a solution," Tay said. "If you jettison my damaged vessel with me inside it, the explosion will create a momentary shield." allowing your ship to escape. It's the logical solution. The bridge fell silent. Everyone turned to look at him. Tay didn't understand their reaction. To a Viridian, self-sacrifice when the math made sense was normal. The needs of many outweigh the needs of one, Tay explained. My people would consider this the correct choice. Captain Park stood and faced Tay directly. His expression was firm but kind. That's not how we do things, Surveyor, he said simply. We don't trade lives even when the math says we should. So what if we reroute emergency power through the auxiliary shields? Sue's voice came back over the comm. Not enough juice. Captain, our backup generators were damaged in the rescue operation. There was a pause, then Sue added, But wait, Tay, doesn't your ship use crystalline power regulation? Tay nodded, surprised by the question. Yes, standard Viridian technology. If we integrate your crystals with our shield emitters... Sue's voice was excited now. We might be able to amplify our shield strength enough to survive the flare. Tay quickly calculated the possibility. Theoretically possible, he admitted, but the chance of success is only 22.7%. Captain Park smiled. Better odds than we usually get. Let's do it. The next minutes were a blur of activity. Tay ran with 2 engineers to his damaged ship, still attached to the horizon. They worked quickly to remove the 3 power regulation crystals from the main engine system. Be careful, Tay warned as one engineer nearly dropped a crystal. These are incredibly sensitive to vibration. They carried the crystals to engineering, where Sue was already modifying the shield emitters. Tay had never seen anyone work so fast. Her hands seemed to blur as she rewired systems and bypassed safety protocols. This goes against every engineering principle I know, Tay said as he helped connect the first crystal. Sometimes you have to break the rules to save lives, Sue replied without looking up. Hand me that coupling tool. The ship shook harder as more radiation hit them. The lights went out completely, leaving only the emergency red glow. 1 minute to main flare impact, June's voice announced over the comm. They connected the last crystal just as the ship gave another violent shake. Tay fell against a wall, hitting his head. His vision blurred, but he could see Sue at the main console, trying to activate the modified shields. It's not working, she shouted. The connection is unstable. Tay pushed himself up. His people were known for their skill with crystal technology. If anyone could make this work, he could. He moved to the console, gently pushing Sue aside. The frequency needs to be exact, he said, his fingers dancing over the controls. Human. Technology is too imprecise. I need to calibrate manually. Tay closed his eyes, feeling the vibration of the crystals through his sensitive fingertips. This was an old Viridian technique, rarely taught to outsiders. He adjusted tiny dials, following the vibrations until they aligned perfectly. 30 seconds to impact, John announced. Almost there, Tay muttered, making one final adjustment. The console suddenly lit up with bright blue light. The crystals hummed in perfect harmony. Shield modifications online, Sue shouted into the comm. Power at 180% and holding. On the bridge, Captain Park watched the main screen as the massive solar flare reached them. The ship shook violently, but the enhanced shields held, glowing with an unusual blue tint. It's working, John said in amazement. The shields are actually getting stronger as they absorb the radiation. The crisis wasn't over, but for the first time survival seemed possible. And for Tay, something had changed. He had found a third option beyond cold logic or emotional decision-making. Perhaps humans and Viridians had more to learn from each other than he had ever imagined. The solar flare passed. The ship was damaged, but everyone was alive. The horizon moved slowly through space, its engines running at half power. Tay stood on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. He had never expected to see stars again when his ship broke down a week ago. Now here he was, alive because humans had refused to accept the logic of letting him die. Behind him, the door slid open. Captain Park walked in, carrying 2 cups of the hot drink humans called coffee. Thought you might want this, Park said, handing a cup to Tay. You've barely rested since the crisis ended. Tay took the cup carefully. I find it difficult to rest. My mind is unsettled. That's normal after nearly dying, Park said, standing beside Tay to look at the stars. It is not the near-death experience that troubles me, Tay replied. It is everything I have learned about humans. You confuse me deeply. Park laughed softly. We tend to have that effect on other species. They stood in silence for a moment. The ship hummed around them as repair crews worked to fix the damage. From the solar flare. We will reach Starbase 7 in 2 days, Park said. From there you can arrange transport back to Viridian space. Tay nodded. Yes. My people will be surprised to learn I survived. They would have calculated my death as certain. And yet here you are, Park said with a smile. Here I am, Tay agreed. Because humans ignored probability and logic. Tay turned to face the captain directly. His large eyes reflected the starlight. How do you do it? He asked. Make decisions when probability indicates likely failure. When I suggested sacrificing myself, the math was clear. One life for many. Yet you refused. We hope, Park replied simply. It's what makes us human. Hope is not a calculation, Tay said. No, it's better than a calculation. Sometimes the universe doesn't follow the math. Tay considered this. In all his education, he had been taught that mathematics was the foundation of reality. Everything could be reduced to numbers and probability, yet these humans had survived by ignoring the numbers. Your species is fascinating, Tay said after a long pause. You lack our technological sophistication, yet you attempt what we would consider impossible. You risk yourselves for strangers. It defies logical explanation. Perhaps some things aren't meant to be explained logically. Park smiled. Your people would benefit from understanding that, just as we could learn from your precision. Tay looked down at the strange crystal and metal bracelet Sue had given him before he left engineering. She had made it from scraps of his ship and the horizon, calling it a friendship bracelet. Another human concept that made no logical sense, yet somehow felt important. I believe you are right, Tay said softly. Our peoples have much to learn from each other. For the next 2 days, Tay helped with repairs. He showed the engineers how Viridian crystal technology worked. They showed him how to jury-rig solutions with limited resources. By the time they reached Starbase 7, Tay had made what humans called friends among the crew. At the starbase, Captain Park arranged for Tay to travel on a trading vessel headed toward Viridian space. The entire crew came to see him off. You'll always have a place on the horizon if you want it, Park said as they said goodbye. Sue hugged him, another strange human custom that Tay found himself returning awkwardly. Don't forget us when you're back with all your logical friends, she said. That would be impossible, Tay replied truthfully. 3 months later, Tay stood before the Viridian High Council in the great crystal chamber on his homeworld. 7 council members sat at a long table, their faces showing no emotion as was proper for Viridians. Surveyor Tay, the head councillor said, your survival was unexpected. Your report on human behavior is unusual. It is truthful, councillor, Tay said. Humans do not follow our logical patterns, yet they survive and even thrive. They saved me when our protocols would have abandoned me. You suggest we form an alliance with them, another councillor noted. Based on what advantage? Based on their different way of thinking, Tay explained. They see possibilities where we see only probabilities. They try when we would surrender. The council members looked at each other. Tay could see they did not understand. How could they? He had not understood until he lived among humans. Let me demonstrate, Tay said. He took out the crystal components he had brought with him, parts from his ship and the horizon. Our scientists said these technologies cannot work together. The probability of successful integration is below 20%. With careful movements, Tay connected the pieces the way Sue had shown him. The crystals glowed, then brightened as they powered the human device. The council members leaned forward, their composure briefly broken by surprise. Impossible, one whispered. No, Tay said, not impossible, just improbable. Humans taught me that there is a difference. As he finished his presentation, Tay thought about his time aboard the horizon. He thought about Captain Park's kindness, Sue's creativity, and how they had all risked their lives to save a stranger. He thought about how, in the cold mathematics of space, the warm improbability of human determination might be the galaxy's most valuable resource. And as he concluded his presentation, Tay did something no Viridian had done before. He smiled. The end.